Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Business Great TV. This is Vietnam edition. Today we'll discuss potential opportunities for non-American investors to do business in Vietnam. And please welcome with us our special guest, Mr. Zach Herbers, Executive Director of Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, and he will share with us many potential opportunities to do business here. Please welcome Zach.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you said, my name is Zach Herbers. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, based in Ho Chi Minh City, but with a mandate across all of Vietnam as well as Canada. And in a nutshell, our mission is to support the development of bilateral opportunity and greater connection between our two countries.
Thank you, Zach. And can you share with us how long have you been in Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh City?
So actually, prior to COVID, I had the opportunity to be here 2 or 3 times. But on this particular trip, or I guess I should say living circumstance, as I'm here permanently, it's been 6 months. Which actually is perfectly coincided with the reopening of Vietnam. So I arrived on March 15th, 2022, which was the day that Vietnam ended travel restrictions for tourism and for business travel. And so since then, it's been quite remarkable seeing month over month the amount of new activity and things going on in this country.
Recently, World Bank forecast that our GDP this year is 7.5%. As the Executive Director of Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, what are the attractive points of Vietnam in the eyes of non-American investors?
Well, I think first of all, the GDP growth projection for 2022 at 7.5%, I believe is the highest in the world for this year. So I think Vietnam has quickly shot up and become on the radar of companies all across the globe as a place for looking at trade opportunities, FDI opportunities, and so forth. Vietnam has recently become Canada's largest trading partner in the ASEAN region, with bilateral trade last year reaching just over $11 billion. It's viewed as a largely stable country from a political and government perspective, which obviously is a massive plus side for anyone looking to invest. And I think the government here has done an excellent job at FDI attraction in terms of creating incentives and policies to help make it easier for companies looking to come in. So there's tax incentives for various operations in manufacturing. And generally, I think a prioritization of making it easier to do business. Further, of course, we have CPTPP, which was put in place a few years ago. Both Canada and Vietnam have signed on to that. And recently, both governments have created a summit that'll happen annually where senior government officials and business leaders from both countries get together to discuss how to further make that work from a practical perspective. So a few other factors. Vietnam, of course, has a very young population. Well over half the country is below the age of 40. There's a rapidly growing middle class, labor force advantages, logistical advantages, and many more aspects that make Vietnam a desirable place to do business.
Thank you. And based on your experience in Vietnam, what are the sectors that you think is wonderful for non-American investors in Vietnam?
That's a good question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, trade has reached about 11 billion. Of that, 10 billion is outward bound from Vietnam to Canada, with 1 billion coming from Canada into Vietnam. Some of those key sectors from Canada mostly relate to food products or raw resources, so things like seafood. You can find lots of Canadian lobster here, lumber for furniture manufacturing, equipment, fertilizer, food products, and things of that nature. From Vietnam going to Canada, you have everything from textiles and footwear to electronics to machinery equipment, consumer products, and really, $10 billion worth of annual trade. But I think where the real opportunities on the horizon lie relate to Vietnam's future growth, which, when you're talking about GDP growth annually reaching numbers between 6 and 10%, depending on the year. I think as things move into the future, sustainability is going to be the key factor to that. So I think where a lot of opportunities for Canadian investors are in fields such as sustainable infrastructure, renewable energies, and other sorts of higher value skills and know-how based products and services that can help play an active role in Vietnam's development, while also, of course, creating a new market for Canadian entrepreneurs and businesses.
As you share about Vietnam potentialities, and when the non-American investors come, what are the differences they may witness in the business and also in the cultural aspects?
That's a good question, and it's something we deal with on a daily basis with the Canadian Chamber, of course, when companies, some of them are well established here, others are just starting to dip their toes in the water, but I think the challenges often are the same. The first one, of course, is language barrier. I've traveled around Asia quite substantially, and I would say Vietnam has fairly strong English capabilities, particularly in the business language, but at the same time it's still a difficult thing to navigate. And so if you're a Canadian company looking to come in for the first time, that's going to be something, of course, you want to be mindful of, that English is not the first language here. You also have different working styles and cultural differences. For example, Vietnam and most Asian countries are considered to be higher context cultures, which value relationships and taking the time to get to know people before you're doing business with them. So it's a lot different than what we see in the North American business environment, where typically people sit down, they discuss business, and that's it. Here, it's a lot more of a longer-term relationship building aspect. Another one that's definitely challenging, and I think it's improving, but still a challenge for foreign companies, is the legal system and regulatory process. Vietnam largely is law by decree, whereas Canada is based around court precedent and sort of Commonwealth-style legal system. So I'm no expert on it, but there's a lot of differences involved there. But overall, I think while there are challenges, they're absolutely manageable. I think that just requires, if you're coming in, be patient, take the time to understand the market, make sure you have strong partners on the ground, and you should be okay.
You cite many opportunities and many potentialities of Vietnam for the non-American investors, and you also share some experience in the differences, cultural differences and business differences and legal differences between North America and Vietnam. So what do you hope to see in the next several years from North American investors?
Well, I think the first thing in the short term is a continued move towards trade. For Canada, currently 70% of trade is done with the United States. But I know there's definitely a growing demand across the board, across all sectors, for market diversification. So that means looking for new markets to sell product into, to source product out of, to invest in, everything under the sun. So I think you'll start to see continued growth in bilateral trade, both from Canadian exports to Vietnam and vice versa. And I'm hoping you'll also start to see a lot more Canadian-led FDI into Vietnam. Longer term, I hope that the two countries will continue to strengthen their partnership and relationship, which, by the way, 2023 will mark 50 years of diplomatic relations between the two countries. So this is a very relevant conversation. But I think hopefully what we'll see is over time, more and more Canadian companies and organizations viewing Vietnam as a place where they can not only invest or trade, but a place where they can be a partner in the sustainable growth of this incredible country, which of course develops more and more opportunities from a Canadian business perspective as well.
You share that between Canada and Vietnam, there's many sectors that two countries can promote and can develop bilateral trade. And you mentioned about the CPTPP, the free trade agreements between many countries, in which there are Vietnam and Canada. In your opinion, what are the impacts of CPTPP in bilateral trade?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, there's a long ways to go. In fact, there was recently a survey done here in Ho Chi Minh City asking local businesses Number one, are they interested in Canada? Almost 100% said yes from a business perspective. When asked how many were actively trading or doing any sort of business with Canada, it was under 10%. There was another question about CPTPP, and it just said, are you aware of CPTPP? And I believe only 15% said yes. And on the Canadian side, I think it's quite similar. So while it's a starting framework, there's a lot of work to be done to make people aware of the certain advantages that come from it, and also how to access those practically. And then, of course, there's work on the ground to make sure that things are working as smoothly as possible. So that's part of the one of the commitments between the Canada and Vietnam government earlier this year, is to work on that continuously moving forward. But in a nutshell, what it does is it's designed to gradually reduce tariffs on massive wide ranges of products over in most cases a tiered approach. So there'll be reductions over periods of 2, 3, 4 years until they're either reduced all the way or at a capped lower rate. So the idea is to make it easier to facilitate trade, and I think that as time goes on, more and more organizations will become aware of it and start to take advantage of those opportunities. So I think the post-COVID world, 2022, 2023, is a perfect opportunity to start to build on that.
As you share with us many expectations in short term and long term, what are the activities of Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam to help business to achieve these expectations?
Well, I think we certainly hope to be an active partner in developing that. As I mentioned earlier, our mission is to support the development of opportunity and connection between the two countries. So I started in the role only about 6 months ago. And in that time, we've seen a rapid development in our membership, and our various activities are focused around that mission. So right now, I would say we're really focused on developing our strategic relationships on the ground here in Vietnam. So working with industry associations and the local government and other important stakeholders here to develop our relations and promote or build awareness of Canada and different opportunities that exist. From there, we're starting to replicate that on the Canadian side, partnering with different chambers of commerce, boards of trade, industry associations, trade and investment, government, trade and investment agencies, and government stakeholders, with the hope that we can start to connect these two countries. Where our membership is open to not just Canadian companies, but also Vietnamese companies or anyone with an interest in exploring opportunities between the two countries. And so we're quite active right now in providing a lot of B2B and referral work, on the ground support, especially as people start to travel for the first time following the pandemic. So we hope that in the next 1, 2, 3 years, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Vietnam will be a very dynamic, continually growing dynamic organization to support those initiatives.
Thank you, Zach, for your participations, and thank you for sharing many potential opportunities in Vietnam. Thank you everyone for watching us, and stay with us next week for more business opportunities. See you!